Okay, guys. So I am recording now. I had forgotten, but I am recording now. Anyway, so I guess I can go back to share my screen. And what I was saying is that I want to do a very quick overview of the history behind international trade, policy, and theory, because if you don't understand where this is coming from, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very challenging for you to understand why international trade as the main engine behind globalization, or one of the main engines behind globalization, is coming from, and why well, so strong and so powerful. So very quickly, I am not going to spend a long time on this, but I think this is important for you to understand and also to keep in the back of your minds. We briefly already talked about mercantilism. This group of people in Europe, very influential politicians, policymakers, intellectuals. We didn't have, in the 1700s, the label of economists yet. We have moral philosophers like Adam Smith and David Hume and David Ricardo and many others. But anyway, this group of people for three centuries, dominated the political discourse, the rhetoric behind what should be the exchange among countries. And the most important element of the mercantilist view is that they thought that international trade was a zero-sum activity. Well, this means basically that for one country to gain wealth through international trade, somebody else, a trading partner, must be losing. So they saw, the economic pie, the size of the economy, as fixed. So if you want to have a bigger slice of that pie or pizza or cake, however you want to call it, the only way for you to make your slice more bigger, it would be for others to have a smaller size. So that's a zero-sum game activity. And of course, this gave rise of this notion of the accumulation of precious metals, gold and silver specifically, because obviously, in the 15, 16, 1700s, we didn't have credit cards, checking accounts, none of that. Most of the currency, were coins. And actually, they were silver coins, gold coins, or payments were actually made in bullion, like bars of gold. Anyway, so the idea based on this principle of zero-sum game activity was that the only way for a country to get wealthier was to sell as much as possible to the rest of the world and receive in return as much gold and silver. So if you were selling, exporting more, and buying, importing less, the reserves in gold and silver were going to grow and grow and grow because you were enjoying payments from the rest of the world. That's what the ROW means here. On the screen, ROW is the rest of the world. So obviously, in the mind of these guys, think about this. For a country to export more and become wealthier, they have to produce more. But in order to produce more, they have to invest more. And this implies the creation of jobs. And, that was the golden rule for prosperity, right? So for 300 years, these guys dominated the ideology around the world, specifically, mostly in Europe, obviously, right? In fact, even today, we have a group, the so-called neo-mercantilists, that still today favor exports. This is the type of people that basically say, buy American or buy local, rather than buying from any other person, because, if you buy from another country, essentially you have to import, and there is going to be an outflow, a leakage, a drainage, a bleeding of resources that we should avoid. Anyway, this is not an international econ class, but they still are around. Neo-mercantilist ideologies are still around. Anyway,
I have a quick question.
Yes, please go ahead, David.
Before industrialization, was this true? because before then, most people's labor was maybe double another person. But because of all the new technology, we can definitely do more labor than someone else. But when everyone's labor was fairly fixed, was it true that one country would benefit but at the price of another, or would you say that's not really true?
No, let me admit that, Norma. No, I would say that in the minds of these people, this was true then, and at least for the neo-mercantilists, is still true today. I see your point, but you know what you're talking about is the source of value. You know, and there are many theories about this. You know, this goes back to the history of economic thought. Whether you know where does value come from? Is it coming from labor? Is it coming from capital? Is it coming from land? Is a combination of the three of them? And we can digress, you know, for hours on this. You know, what's the source of value? What these guys are talking about is a purely profit motive. You know, how do we get richer? And the answer was simple: export as much as you can, limit your imports as much as you can, and that way you are going to accumulate payments in the form of gold and silver. That was it. That was it. Whether they were industrialized or not. Remember, in the 1500s, you know, I mean, if you're talking about the industrial revolution, for example, well, this happened way before that, and after that, it was a similar idea. But as you will see, you know, even this idea in the early or in the 1800s had some flaws. So let me talk about the flaws, so that you don't think that I am you know, basing this explanation only on this neo-mercantilist idea that seems so powerful. So I don't know if I answered your question, David. I hope I did, but we can go back to explore this later. So David Hume, one of those moral philosophers, a British guy, basically said, okay, guys, you know what? You are looking at this the wrong way. Because when you, and this is the beginning of the monetarist theory of inflation, if you will, that later was espoused by Milton Friedman and many other people. But basically what David Hume said was the following: if you are successful in your strategy for development to enrich yourself by practicing this mercantilist idea, this is what is going to happen. You're going to be accumulating gold and silver, gold and silver, gold and silver, and that is the equivalent of printing money. That is the equivalent of an increase in the money supply, which is going to create inflation. And when the prices, domestic prices, go up, it's going to be more difficult to be able to sell to the rest of the world because the prices internally are higher and higher and higher. So this strategy only works for a while. And the more successful you are, you know, the seeds of the failure of the strategy are part of the success. You get the idea? So yes, it's probably true that if you are successful in the pursuit of this idea, of these policies, you gain more wealth, you accumulate more gold and silver. But inflation kicks in, domestic prices rise, and then you lose your competitiveness around the world, limiting your ability to export even further, right? Anyway, that was David Hume. But then, obviously, we had, well, what many people in economics consider the champion, right? The father of modern economics, Adam Smith, another British moral philosopher. You know, you probably remember this very famous book, The Wealth of Nations, written in 1776. And basically, he said, you know, guys, you are wrong. You know, you are looking at this the wrong way for a very simple reason. Adam Smith spoke about division of labor and specialization. And most of you should remember these basic ideas, but for those of you that are not in econ, that's not a problem. Basically, what he said is this: world output is not fixed. If we organize economic activity in a more efficient way, the pie, the size of the pie can expand. The cake, which is the size of the economy, can grow. And this is why division and specialization is very important, because Adam Smith was basically saying the international trade is not a zero-sum game activity. For one country to gain is not necessary for another country to lose. Both can benefit. And three or more, as many partners in this international trade agreement participate, can benefit. You know, this is a complete departure from the mercantilist idea, complete departure from David Hume's principle. And basically he said, this is all, and this goes back to probably your question, David, to the labor theory of value. Basically, Adam Smith believed that the source of value of things came from labor, right? So, you know, this is the typical example that, you know, in books you encounter. So imagine two nations, US, the USA, and ROW is the rest of the world. You know, this could be any country. And there are two goods, cloth and wheat. So that's all that we can produce. And there are two, well, there is just one factor of production, in this case, labor. So you have two countries, two goods, and one labor. One factor of production, which is labor. So the table on the screen basically shows that, if you notice, let me go back here, the US has an absolute advantage in the production of wheat, and the rest of the world has an absolute advantage in the production of cloth. How do I know that? Well, you have two ways to see this. So let's look at the number of hours to make 1 yard of cloth. In the US, let me, I don't know if I want to do this or not, but let's do it. So I'm looking at this. In the US, you need 1 labor hour to make 1 yard of cloth. I'm sorry, 1 yard of cloth it requires 4 hours of labor, and in the US, 1 bushel of wheat requires 2 hours of labor. But notice what happens in the rest of the world. Wheat is more expensive and cloth is cheaper, right? So the US, it has an absolute advantage in the production of wheat, and the rest of the world has an absolute advantage in the production of cloth. This is very easy to see. This is not really something really difficult to understand. Let me clear this. Admit Norma. Okay. So basically what Adam Smith was saying is the following. If the US specializes in the production of wheat, and the rest of the world specializes in the production of clothes, the allocation of resources is going to be more efficient, and therefore the production of both clothes and wheat are going to expand globally. And then when you bring these two goods to the global market and exchange, everybody's going to benefit, because now we have, you know, the same number of people that on their own will be producing a given amount of cloth and a given amount of wheat, but now specializing, when they bring these to the international trade, which is going to be a bigger amount of cloth and wheat, everybody wins. Everybody wins. So this is the whole idea behind division of labor and specialization. Let me stop this very quickly. The actual example is a very famous example that has to do with a pin factory, you know, the pin that you used to in the clothes. So the story goes something like this, you know, Adam Smith is walking somewhere in London or whatever in the UK, and walks into a pin factory, and what he sees surprises him. So he sees every member of this, you know, this small shop doing everything across the production process. So they're producing pins. So everybody's doing everything, meaning, so you have the wire, the long wire, the same person has to straighten the wire, the same person is cutting the wire in little pieces. The same person is sharpening one edge of this piece of wire that has been, straightened, and the same person is putting the head so you have a pin. Another Smith said, no, this is the wrong way. I can give you a formula, he says to the owner, so that with the same number of workers, you can double or perhaps triple your production. He said, what do you mean, Mr. Smith? Well, all you need to do is to specialize. This guy should be specializing in flattening the wire. And that's it. That's all he should be doing. And this worker over here, she should be specializing in cutting it. That's all she should be doing, right? And, division and specialization. If you do that, I guarantee you that you are going to be producing a lot more, or faster with the same number of people. Because, when you specialize, you get better, you are faster, you discover ways to, make things more efficient. Anyway, so this idea of division and specialization in the pin factory, Adam Smith is taking this at a global scale. So if countries specialize in a particular production, the production of a particular good, and everybody is doing the same, production is going to expand. And through international trade, consumption is going to expand as well, right? So think about this. It's a very powerful notion, but this is not the end of the story, because there is a minor complication. Here is a problem. What happens if one country is the best at everything, for whatever reason, technology, knowledge, experience, or whatever? What happens if one country has no absolute advantage and the other country has absolute advantage in the production of everything? Thinking about two countries just to facilitate the idea. Well, David Ricardo, another British moral philosopher that some of you, I am sure, have heard about before, basically said, well, what you need to do is to extend this concept of absolute advantage and make it a comparative advantage. Because he demonstrated that even when a situation like that is taking place, it is possible for trading partners to benefit when they engage in international trade. And by those conditions, I mean when one country is better than the other at everything. So, for example, think about this. It's a similar table, but in this case, the US has absolute disadvantages in both goods. So the question is, can international trade bring net gains to both countries? And the answer is yes, because David Ricardo said, do not focus on the absolute price, focus on the relative price, or in other words, the opportunity cost of producing one good over the other. So if you look at this table, and again, I am not going to test you on the mathematics of this. This is just the concept, guys. So the idea, for example, in this table, this one right here, is that you can see that because in the US, 4 hours of labor can produce either 2 bushels of wheat or 1 yard of cloth, while in the rest of the world, 1 hour of labor can produce either 0.67 bushels of wheat or 1 yard of cloth. You have this table of comparative prices or relative prices of comparative advantage. So the US has a comparative advantage in wheat production because what? Well, look at this. In the US, 1 yard is going to cost, half a yard is going to cost 1 bushel of wheat, while in the rest of the world, they have to pay 1.5 yards of cloth. And the opposite is true when you look at the price of cloth. So what the idea is that you need to think about the relative prices, not the absolute prices. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into this because this is not an international trade class, but here is the reason I'm doing this. This basic idea that began with mercantilism, David Hume, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, became what now is known as the leading international trade theory, or the HO theory, or the Heckscher-Ohlin theory. So we're talking about two Swedish economists that in the early 20th century, in 1920s. By the way, Heckscher was the professor, Ohlin was the student, developing these theories in Swedish. So very few people could actually read what these guys were writing. But anyway, Heckscher dies, the professor, Ohlin takes over and finish these ideas. But all of this is written in Swedish. So it took many, many years until it was translated. Well, not many years, but some time until this was translated to English and other languages. And suddenly these ideas started spreading like fire and became now what is known as the HO, International Trade Theory, which is the fundamental structure to understand, to explain why we have globalization today. The power of international trade, the rhetoric, the explanations, theoretical explanations as to why we should be doing what we are doing, right? So the idea is that the most important implication of this theory is in this box, where that basically says a country should produce and export the goods that use its abundant factor intensively, and imports the goods or services using the scarce factors intensively, right? So what does this mean? What does this mean? All right. Let's define abundant first. So a country is labor abundant, or land abundant, or capital abundant if it has a higher ratio of land, labor, or capital to the other factors than the rest of the world. So for example, obviously here in the US, we have a significant amount of capital, and most of the goods and services that we produce are capital intensive. In Latin America, where they have a significant amount of land, agricultural land, it's not surprising to see that you have Latin American countries producing and exporting land and labor too, but land intensive goods, like, guess what? Raw materials, bananas, pineapples, or others like minerals, oil, gold, silver. And here is the other important definition: labor intensive, land intensive, capital intensive. So you see, you have two very important concepts. You want to use, for the production of the things that you're going to be selling to the rest of the world, you want to use the resource that you have in abundance and use that resource intensively. So if you have a lot of capital, well, you should be producing and selling capital intensive goods. If you have a lot of land, you should be producing and selling to the rest of the world land intensive goods and services. You get the idea? Let me stop here for a second. So I don't know if this is clear, guys, but if you are connecting the dots here, you are going to see already a clash between international trade theory and what dependency theory say. So international trade theory says, no, you guys in Latin America should be specializing in the production and export of raw materials, right? But dependency theory says, no way, if we do that, because of the decline in terms of trade, we are going to end up, first, remember I used the example of 1 metric ton of pineapples in exchange of one of your cars, you guys in Germany. But the price of cars starts rising relative to the price of pineapples. And over time, we're going to have to produce not 1 metric ton, but 2 metric tons of pineapples in order to buy the same car from you guys in Germany. That's not a good deal for us, right? And this is why there is this, competing theories, after the practice of what the country should be doing. And this is why I call this the HO theory, the leading international trade theory, because this is the dominant theory right now in the world. You know, most countries basically are doing what the theory preaches. We should be, you know, if you have lots of oil in Saudi Arabia, well, guess what? You should be obviously specializing in the production of oil-related stuff, and that's what they do. In Latin America, raw materials. In Japan, you know, highly intensive capital like Singapore and others, right? Yes, Cody.
Yeah, so in terms of dependency theory and sort of modern sort of ideas on international trade, wouldn't international trade explain what dependency theory says about Latin America? Because them participating in the market in this way and specializing in whatever they're going to, although it benefits consumers, it's not going to benefit the producers in their country in terms of diversifying everything. So would it be more of an explanation for why dependency theory sort of arises?
Yes, in part, but also don't forget that, you know, producers, normally when we talk about producers, we're talking about the workforce employed at factories or farms, producing what they are selling to the rest of the world. And that's true, but these workforce are also consumers, right? This is why, and actually, let me use that idea to do the following. Give me a second here. Share. I'm going to skip this for a second because later there were two corollaries, or more than two, but different, what's the word? Ramifications, extensions, corollaries based on this theory. One is the Stolper-Samuelson theorem. Basically, the theorem says that if a country is shifting from a no trade to a trade position, the change is going to imply the following: the change in the prices of goods is going to increase, and I'm just reading my own notes right here, okay? I'm just reading this because I think it's tied to what you said, Cody. According to this theorem, when two or more countries start exchanging international trade, it's going to increase the real return income to the factor used intensively in the rising price industry. So, for example, according to this theorem, you should see that the wage pay to factory workers should increase as this country increases in the production and export of labor-intensive stuff, or in farming or whatever, because that's the expanding industry. At the same time, it should reduce the income to the factor used intensively in the falling price industry. So, for example, and this is what happens all the time, when two countries or more countries engage in an international agreement, you're going to see expanding sectors and declining sectors. So, for example, when NAFTA was signed in 1994, this is what many people in the US fear, that many factories were going to shut down, we're going to close their doors and move south, move to Mexico, because labor was cheaper over there. So the manufacturing sector for clothing, in this case, you know, if you think about, for example, the Levi factory that actually moved south, they shut the doors, they move, and of course the return to workers working in this industry was going down. So that's what the theorem says. But here is the second one, the factor price equalization theorem. So according to this theorem, at least mathematically speaking, remember, we're talking about a theory, okay? We are going to explain later why this theory is not working so well anymore in a few minutes. But in theory, on paper, behind this, I can give you a very elegant mathematical model, very impressive, you know, differential equations, and anyway, very amazing mathematical work. But anyway, the second theorem has to do with factor price equalization. According to this, based on the theory, free trade should equalize not just the price of goods and services, but also should equalize the price of the factors of production, wages across industries between countries. So in theory, for example, you should see that after NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, accountants in the US should be making the same amount of accountants in Mexico and Canada. Farmers in Mexico should be making the same amount of money, well, in their local currency, adjusted by the exchange rate, of course, making the same amount of money than farmers in the US and farmers in Canada. And this is supposed to happen even if migration, legal or illegal, is not necessary, is not allowed. You know, in other words, you don't need factors of production to migrate across borders for this equalization to take place. Right? So let me stop here very quickly. So basically, what this whole theory, the Heckscher-Ohlin theory and the theorems that were derived based on that, predicates and argues that international trade is extremely beneficial. It doesn't matter what you say or which angle do you look at. Increases production, increases efficiency in the allocation of resources, check. Increases production, check. Increases consumption, check. But not only that, it's going to give a premium in terms of rising income to the expanding, growing industry, and is going to penalize the declining, high cost, inefficient industry, check. But not only that, it's going to make things more equal across countries. So when you sell this to the rest of the world, policymakers, the WTO, it's hard not to think of this as, okay, this is the silver bullet that we have been looking for. Does that make sense, Cody? Well, everybody?
Yeah, it makes sense in theory, but
yes,
I think maybe you can go in and later you'll probably talk about sort of the shortcomings of it.
Yes.
So Stolper and Samuelson, doesn't that just lead into the pros and cons of Dutch disease that Latin America already sort of suffered from?
Well, the Dutch disease is obviously one of those situations where the proponents of the Heckscher-Ohlin theory would say, well, this is just a bad decision, poor decision making. You shouldn't have done it. This has nothing to do with the theory. I mean, all it says is that you basically produce bad policy. You shouldn't have. You shouldn't. Like I said before, place all your eggs in one basket. You need to diversify. You need to, yes, you need to specialize, but if you concentrate in one good only, like is the case of the Dutch disease, and worse, in just a few trading partners, the combination can be fatal because either the price of the commodity falls and or the economies of your trading partners go down, and if both of those things happen at the same time, you're doomed. Think about the combination, like, well, the case of oil in Venezuela. The economy enters into a bad recession. Say that 2007, 2009. The main trading partner is the U.S. So suddenly, for Venezuela, the price of oil is going down. One problem. And the main buyer of oil, the US, is not buying as much. Number two, the second problem. So the combination proved fatal. But this is not necessarily related to the theory, right? But yes, I can see your point. The Dutch disease is one argument against specialization, if you will, right? Yeah. Let me finish with this because I don't want to forget. Share. Very quickly, I have 5 minutes to make this argument, to make this point. So right now, give or take, this is a table that I took from one of my economic development classes. But anyway, this is, give or take, the distribution of resources around the world. And by this, I mean physical capital right here, which includes not only roads and highways, but also machinery, equipment, factories. You have highly skilled labor like physicians, doctors, medium skilled labor, I don't know, high school, perhaps college students, unskilled labor, probably illiterate people, land, arable land, and forest land, right? So notice something very interesting. Obviously, the US, we have a huge amount of physical capital and a huge amount of skilled labor. And in contrast, look at developing countries, you know, they have 98.6% of the unskilled labor around the world. So based on the theory, you should expect that developing countries should produce, specialize and produce goods and services that are highly intense in the use of unskilled labor, clothing, farming, and the US, on the other hand, should specialize in the production of goods and services that require significant amount of physical capital and highly skilled labor, computers, and services too, accounting services, financial services, and so forth, right? So in principle, it seems like, okay, that fits. Now, and this is where we are going to start looking into some of the problems. So if you look at consistent examples or examples that are consistent with the HO theory, you can see, well, because the US also has a significant amount of arable land, you know, 17.6%, just the US, you know, we're a huge country. Just because of that, we are net exporters of wheat, net exporters of corn, but we don't have a lot of unskilled labor. This is why we are net importers of clothes and accessories, shoes and other footwear. You know, this coming from Pakistan, from Guatemala, from China, and so forth. So these are examples of goods and services that are consistent with the HO theory. But there are way too many examples of goods and services that are not necessarily consistent. Think about this. Did you know that the US is a net importer of cars? So we are buying more cars from Germany, Italy, France, Japan, Korea, than the cars that we are selling them. The same with computers. So what's going on, right? What's going on? Shouldn't we leading the pack? Well, you know, this is where things are going to start getting interesting because, well, we are going to learn that the theory, as powerful, elegant, convincing as it sounds and as it looks, was developed during years and situations that are not here anymore. So just to give you a glimpse of what I'm talking about, what makes a German car German, like say a BMW, when it has a huge content of Mexican labor, the rubber is coming from Brazil, maybe the design is German, maybe even not even the design, or a computer, is it Japanese, American, Chinese? You know, it's very interesting. So because of movement, migration, you know, that introduces another, you know, layer of complexity to the original Heckscher Olin, David Ricardo, Adam Smith ideas. The conditions that exist today in the world are not what they were, you know, 200 or 300 years ago. Now we have a very different world, very different conditions, where you may have a multinational corporation from the US in Costa Rica producing pineapples. Wait a second, are these pineapples from Costa Rica being sold to the US? You know, it's hard to understand these things, you know, and of course there are ways to do it. And I don't have time to explain this well, I'm out of time now, but anyway, this is where we're going, guys. And the reason I wanted to give you this quick overview is because, like I said, if we are going to be introducing some elements of analysis into contemporary trade policy in Latin America, we need to understand what the trade theory and the trade policies are coming from and what do they mean, all right? Anyway, questions, comments?
I have a question. I just don't want to hold the class for my question. I don't,
Oh, that's okay. I tell you what, it's 2:50. If you need to go, please leave. If you want to stay, you're welcome to stay. So please go ahead, Sandeep.
Okay. So when in regards to international theory and the new left, right? The international theory is all about comparative advantage, right? And what a country could produce efficiently. Compared to the new left, it was more of higher prices for commodities, right? And products that it imported in, right? The new left was all about increasing prices to increase government revenue, right?
You're talking about dependency theory, and some of the new left, the radical new left, espouse some of these ideas. Yes, Andy. Yes.
Okay. And in regards to don't you? I mean, this is like more of like a belief type of question, I guess. But don't you think bringing the lowest prices to consumers should be the main objective?
Well, not necessarily, because as we know, we also have to think about quality. Not always the cheapest thing is the best. The same way, not always the most expensive one is the highest quality. But the other problem is this: in this quest for efficiency, cost reduction, in order to drive prices down, we also have to be mindful of this race to the bottom. If you start putting companies to compete against each other to reduce costs, you are going to, by extension, invite them to start forcing other countries to lower standards. And then, we can produce, I mean, just to give you an idea, and this is something that is happening today, but just to give you an idea, some of the cheap things that we buy, we don't know this, but they are produced in factories in developing countries, some of which are in Latin America, the sweatshop factories, where you have children working 14, 16 hours a day, no breaks, no benefits, and they should be at school. Well, guess what? You can buy a very nice shirt for only $15. How on earth? Oh, awesome. We in the rich world, we welcome these super low prices, and we are thinking that the CEOs are super smart, that they are figuring out ways to reduce cost, and that's true. But the question is, at what cost, and where are these costs being are taking place? Who is bearing the cost of those low prices?
I totally get what you're saying. I guess I'm just thinking of more like the macroeconomic policy of more, less cheaper prices, more income for individuals, hence more investment into the country. I guess that's what.
No, okay. So let me give you the back flip of the coin. If we are able to identify ways to cut production cost that do not interfere or do not mess up, the quality, the workplace, the environment, that they don't degrade the rule of law, that things, this is why the institutional framework is so important. If we are able to do that, to reduce prices, because like you said, this is, I mean, if prices go down, our purchasing power goes up. We can buy more of everything, and we, in principle, are supposed to be happier, right? More satisfied, which is not necessarily true either, but let's suppose it is. So if we are able to do that without producing external costs, or these so-called externalities, the cost to bystanders like workers, the environment, and many other actors, fine. Oh, absolutely. The problem is that, especially in developing countries, because of corruption and weak institutional frameworks, the absence of the rule of law, corporations are finding ways to reduce costs that are not necessarily noble. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. That's why you get all that, like those sweatshops in China and whatnot.
Yep.
Real quick, I just want to ask this because I've been wanting to ask this for a while. In these Latin American countries, are these countries a lot of cash based, where like they buy and sell and trade using cash?